The morning sun beat down on Fort Carson, Colorado, turning the shooting range into a shimmering ribbon of heat and dust. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead as she watched another round of elite snipers miss their target. 20 attempts, 20 failures. The impossible shot had become a running joke among the military's best marksmen. "That target's cursed," muttered Sergeant First Class Mike Henderson, lowering his rifle with disgust. 1,600 meters, uphill, wind gusting from 3 directions. Nobody's making that shot. Maria stood quietly at the edge of the range, holding a clipboard. At 32 years old, she'd spent the last 8 years working in the mess hall at Fort Carson. Her strong hands, which now chopped vegetables and stirred massive pots of stew, had once held a rifle with precision and pride. But that was before the accident, before everything changed. "Hey, Rodriguez," called out Captain Barnes, the range master. "You getting all this documented? Command wants a full report on why our best shooters can't hit a stationary target." "Yes, sir," Maria replied, her voice steady and professional. She made another note on her paperwork, her handwriting neat despite the trembling that never quite left her right hand. The other soldiers barely noticed her. To them, she was just the cook, the quiet woman who served their meals and disappeared back into the kitchen. They didn't know her story. They didn't know that before the convoy accident in Afghanistan, before the IED explosion that shattered her arm and ended her combat career, Maria Rodriguez had been one of the finest scouts in the Army. Master Sergeant Thomas Kane stepped up to the firing line next. He was a legend, a sniper with over 200 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. If anyone could make this shot, it was Kane. He settled into position, his breathing controlled, his movements practiced and smooth. The entire range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kane squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out across the Colorado landscape. Everyone watched through binoculars, waiting for confirmation. "Miss," called the spotter, "low and right about 2 feet." Kane stood up, shaking his head. "The physics on that shot are wrong somehow. The wind patterns don't make sense. It's like there's a dead zone about halfway to the target that's throwing everything off." Captain Barnes looked frustrated. "All right, that's 21 attempts from 21 shooters. Anyone else want to try before I call this whole exercise a failure?" Maria's hand tightened on her clipboard. She felt something stir inside her, a old familiar feeling she'd tried to bury for 5 years. The need to prove herself. The desire to show what she could still do. "I'd like to try, sir," she said quietly. The entire range went silent. Then someone laughed. "Did the cook just volunteer?" said Lieutenant Morrison, grinning. "What Ray you gonna do, throw a pot roast at it?" More laughter rippled through the assembled soldiers. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. Captain Barnes looked uncomfortable. "Rodriguez, with all due respect, this is for trained marksmen. We're trying to solve a tactical problem here." "I understand, sir," Maria said, stepping forward. "But I used to be a scout before my injury. I qualified expert marksman 6 years running." "Yeah, but you work in the kitchen now," said Morrison, not bothering to hide his contempt. "Stick to what you know, honey." Maria met his eyes. "I know shooting, Lieutenant, and I know that target." Something in her voice made Captain Barnes pause. He studied her face, perhaps seeing for the first time the steel underneath her quiet demeanor. "You really think you can make a shot our best snipers have all missed?" he asked. "I'd like the chance to try, sir." Barnes looked at his watch, then at the assembled soldiers. "All right, 1 attempt. But Rodriguez, understand this is going in my report either way. If you miss, and you probably will, it doesn't reflect poorly on you. This shot seems impossible." "Thank you, sir," Maria said. She handed her clipboard to another soldier and approached the firing line. Kane offered her his rifle, a top-of-the-line M110 with a high-powered scope. "You know how to use one of these?" he asked, not unkindly. Yes, Sergeant, Maria said, accepting the weapon. It felt heavy and familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend. She settled into position, feeling the hard ground beneath her elbows. Her right hand trembled slightly as she gripped the rifle, but she breathed through it, letting years of training take over. The pain was always there, a constant reminder of the day her convoy was hit. But pain was just a signal. It didn't have to control her. Through the scope, she studied the target. 1,600 meters away, up a gradual slope, sitting in a valley where three different wind currents met and swirled. She could see why the others had missed. They were calculating for straight-line wind resistance. They weren't accounting for the thermal currents rising from the sun-baked rocks below the target. Maria had grown up in New Mexico, hunting with her father in terrain just like this. She knew these landscapes in her bones. She closed her eyes and felt the wind on her face. From the west, steady and strong. From the north, occasional gusts. And from the ground itself, rising heat that would lift her bullet at the midpoint of its flight, then drop it as it cooled. "Any day now, Chef," Morrison called out. "Some of us have actual work to do." Maria ignored him. She opened her eyes and made her calculations. Windage, elevation, the curve of the Earth itself over that distance, and the thermal lift that everyone else was missing. She adjusted her aim, breathing slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Mija, don't fight the shot, become part of it. You, the rifle, the bullet, the target, all one thing." Maria squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The shot thundered across the range. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the spotter's voice came through, shocked and clear. "Hit, dead center mass, perfect shot." The range erupted. Soldiers rushed forward with binoculars, confirming what seemed impossible. The cook, the quiet woman they'd all dismissed, had made a shot that had defeated every elite marksman on the base. Captain Barnes stared at Maria as she stood up, handing the rifle back to Kane. "How?" Barnes asked simply. "Thermal currents, sir," Maria said. "The sun heats the rocks below the target, creates an updraft at the midpoint. You have to aim low to compensate. The wind is just a distraction. The real challenge is the heat." Kane was studying her with new respect. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My father taught me," Maria said. "We hunted in the New Mexico desert, similar conditions." Morrison wasn't laughing anymore. He looked angry, like Maria had somehow cheated by being better than expected. But Captain Barnes was smiling. "Rodriguez, I think we need to have a conversation about your current assignment. The Army might have better uses for you than the mess hall." Maria felt something crack open inside her chest, a door she'd thought was closed forever. "I'm happy to serve however I'm needed, sir," she said. As she walked back to collect her clipboard, Master Sergeant Kane fell into step beside her. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked quietly. "Everyone on this base thinks you're just a cook." Maria was quiet for a moment. "After my injury, I thought that's all I could be anymore. It took seeing everyone else fail to remember that maybe I still had something to offer." "Well," Kane said, "you just embarrassed some of the best shooters in the Army. That's going to make waves." Maria nodded. She could already feel eyes on her, some admiring, some resentful, all surprised. She didn't know it yet, but that single shot had changed everything. The quiet cook had just reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving. That real skill didn't come from titles or assignments, but from dedication and heart. And in doing so, she'd set in motion events that would test her in ways far more challenging than any shooting range ever could. The week after Maria's impossible shot, Fort Carson hummed with gossip. The story spread like wildfire. The mess hall cook who'd shown up the elite snipers. Some soldiers sought her out during meals, treating her with new respect. Others, like Lieutenant Morrison, seemed to take her success as a personal insult. Maria tried to return to her normal routine. She arrived at the mess hall before dawn, preparing breakfast for 3,000 soldiers. Her hands moved automatically through familiar tasks, scrambling eggs, flipping pancakes, checking temperature logs. But something had shifted inside her. The shot had awakened memories and feelings she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. On Thursday morning, Captain Barnes appeared at the mess hall during the breakfast rush. Maria was behind the serving line, ladling oatmeal into bowls. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said formally, "I need to speak with you. Can you take a break?" Maria glanced at her supervisor, Sergeant Chen, who nodded. She washed her hands and followed Barnes to a quiet corner of the dining facility. "I've been reviewing your service record," Barnes said. "Before your injury, you were on track for promotion. Excellent marks across the board. Your commanding officer in Afghanistan recommended you for a Bronze Star after the incident that injured you." Maria shifted uncomfortably. She didn't like talking about that day. "You stayed with a wounded soldier under fire for 40 minutes, Barnes continued. "Provided medical care and returned fire to keep the enemy back until medevac arrived. You saved Private Henderson's life." "I did my job, sir," Maria said quietly. "You did more than that. And according to medical records, you've regained about 85% function in your arm. Is that accurate?" Maria nodded. "Physical therapy helped a lot. I still have some tremors, but I manage." Barnes studied her. "I'm putting together a special training program. We've got a new generation of recruits who need to learn shooting in complex conditions, desert environments, mountain terrain, urban settings with unusual wind patterns. I want you to help develop the curriculum." Maria's heart began to race. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified to train." "You made a shot that stumped 20 elite marksmen," Barnes interrupted. "You understand terrain and conditions in a way most of our instructors don't. You'd be working with the training team, not leading it, but your expertise would be invaluable." "What about my current assignment?" "We'd get you a replacement in the mess hall. Rodriguez, the Army invested a lot in your training. It seems wasteful to have you chopping onions when you could be passing on critical skills." Maria wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes, but doubt crept in, the same doubt that had kept her in the kitchen for 5 years. "Can I think about it, sir?" she asked. Barnes looked disappointed but nodded. "You have 48 hours, but Maria, and I hope you don't mind me being informal, don't let fear make this decision for you. You've already proved you still have what it takes." After he left, Maria returned to the serving line. Her hands trembled more than usual as she dished out scrambled eggs. Private Henderson, the same young soldier whose life she'd saved in Afghanistan, now stationed at Fort Carson, came through the line. "Morning, Sergeant Rodriguez," he said with a smile. "Heard you showed up the snipers pretty good." "Just got lucky, Henderson," Maria said. "That's not what I heard. Hey, are you okay? You look stressed." Maria forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a busy morning." But she wasn't fine. That evening, alone in her small apartment off base, Maria stared at the Bronze Star citation framed on her wall. She rarely looked at it anymore. Most days she tried to pretend that version of herself. The brave scout, the sharpshooter, the soldier who ran toward danger, had died in that convoy explosion. It was easier to be the quiet cook. Safer. Less chance of failure, of letting people down, of discovering that her best days were truly behind her. Her phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. "Mija," her mother said warmly, "how are you?" "I'm okay, Mama, just tired." "Your father heard about your shot from someone on base. He's very proud." Maria smiled despite herself. It was just one shot. "Your father says one shot is all it takes to remember who you are. He wants to know when you're coming home for a visit." "Soon, Mama. Work is busy right now." After they hung up, Maria pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of her in uniform at various stages of her career, training exercises, deployments, her graduation from sniper school. In every photo, she looked confident, strong, purposeful. When had she lost that? Was it the explosion? Or was it the months of painful recovery afterward when doctors told her she'd never shoot competitively again, never serve in combat again, never be the soldier she'd trained to become? The next morning, Maria arrived at the mess hall to find Lieutenant Morrison waiting outside. "Rodriguez," he said coldly, "we need to talk." Maria braced herself. Morrison had been hostile ever since the shooting range incident. "Sir, I've been hearing rumors that Captain Barnes wants to pull you out of the kitchen, put you on some training team," Morrison said. "I've advised him against it." Maria felt anger flare in her chest. "On what grounds, sir?" "You're a cook. You haven't served in a tactical capacity in 5 years. One lucky shot doesn't qualify you to train soldiers." "It wasn't luck," Maria said, her voice hard. "I understood the conditions. I made the calculations. I executed the shot. That's skill, not luck." Morrison's face reddened. "Watch your tone, Staff Sergeant. You might have impressed some people with your little stunt, but I know what you are. You're damaged goods. A washed-up soldier who couldn't cut it anymore, so you hid in the kitchen. The Army doesn't need your kind pretending to be something they're not." The words hit Maria like physical blows, because part of her believed them. Part of her had been whispering the same things for 5 years. But another part, the part that had made that impossible shot, the part that had stayed under fire to save Henderson's life, that part was stronger than her fear. "Permission to speak freely, sir," Maria said. Morrison crossed his arms. "Granted." "You're scared," Maria said quietly. "You're scared because a cook made a shot you couldn't make. You're scared because it reminds everyone that rank and position don't automatically mean competence. And you're scared that if I succeed in a training role, it'll expose how little you actually know about real-world shooting conditions." Morrison's face went purple. "You're out of line, Rodriguez." "No, sir. I'm exactly on the line between who I was and who I'm still capable of being. And you don't get to decide which side of that line I stand on." Maria walked past him into the mess hall, her heart pounding. She'd never spoken to an officer like that before. It was reckless. It could cost her career. But it felt like breathing after being underwater for 5 years. That afternoon, Maria walked into Captain Barnes' office. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll join the training program." Barnes smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. We start next Monday. You'll be working with Master Sergeant Kane and 2 other instructors. Your focus will be environmental shooting, helping soldiers understand terrain, weather, and unusual conditions." "Thank you for the opportunity, sir." "Don't thank me yet. Morrison's been in my ear all morning, trying to convince me this is a mistake. You're going to have to prove yourself all over again." Maria nodded. "I'm ready for that." As she left Barnes' office, she passed Morrison in the hallway. He glared at her but said nothing. Maria kept walking, her head high. That weekend, she drove home to New Mexico to see her parents. Her father, a retired Marine, met her at the door with a crushing hug. "Your mother told me about the new assignment," he said. "I'm proud of you, Mija." They spent the afternoon in the desert where he'd taught her to shoot as a teenager. The landscape was exactly as she remembered, harsh, beautiful, unforgiving. "You know what I learned in the Marines," her father said as they watched the sunset paint the rocks orange and gold. "Fear is just information. It tells you something matters. The question is whether you let it stop you or guide you." Maria thought about that as she drove back to Colorado the next day. Fear had stopped her for 5 years. Now it was time to let it guide her instead. Monday morning, Maria reported to the training facility in her combat uniform. It felt strange after so long in kitchen whites. Master Sergeant Kane greeted her warmly, along with the other instructors. a quiet woman named Chen, and an enthusiastic young sergeant named Williams. "All right, Rodriguez," Kane said. "Welcome to the team, ready to show some recruits how it's done." Maria picked up a rifle, feeling its familiar weight settle into her hands. The first month of Maria's new assignment felt like learning to walk again. She knew the technical skills, windage calculations, elevation adjustments, reading terrain features, but translating that knowledge into teaching was harder than she'd expected. The recruits were young and eager, but they looked at her with uncertainty. The female instructor with the trembling hand who'd supposedly made an impossible shot. Some wanted to believe in her, others waited for her to fail. Lieutenant Morrison made sure everyone knew his opinion. He attended several training sessions, standing at the back with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. Whenever a recruit struggled or Maria had to repeat an explanation, he'd make a note on his clipboard. "He's trying to build a case against you," Master Sergeant Kane told her one afternoon as they cleaned rifles after a training session. "He wants you back in the kitchen." "Let him try," Maria said, her jaw set. "I'm not giving him ammunition. I'm doing my job and doing it well." "You are," Kane agreed. "The recruits are learning faster than any group I've worked with. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What Maria was doing was teaching them to see, not just through scopes, but with their whole bodies, to feel wind direction, to notice temperature changes, to read landscape features that affected bullet trajectory. She taught them the lessons her father had taught her in the New Mexico desert. Private Jessica Chen, a sharp-eyed 20-year-old from California, became Maria's star pupil. Chen absorbed every lesson, asked intelligent questions, and practiced relentlessly. She reminded Maria of herself at that age, hungry to prove herself in a male-dominated field, determined to be the best. "How do you stay so calm when you shoot?" Chen asked one day during a break. "I get so nervous, my hands shake." Maria held up her right hand, which trembled slightly even at rest. "My hands shake too. It's from nerve damage. But I learned that shaking doesn't matter if you time your shot right. You breathe, you wait for the natural pause between heartbeats, and you squeeze the trigger when everything aligns." Chen watched Maria's hand with fascination. "I didn't know about your injury." "Most people don't. They see the tremor and assume I'm nervous or incompetent. But some things you don't overcome, you adapt to." That conversation was overheard by several other recruits, and word spread. The trembling hand wasn't a weakness. It was proof that Maria had been tested and survived. The recruits started asking her questions about Afghanistan, about her injury, about how she'd come back from it. Maria didn't share everything. She never talked about the nightmares, or the year of depression after her medical discharge from combat duty, or the days she'd considered leaving the army entirely. But she shared enough to show them that strength wasn't about being fearless. It was about showing up anyway. 6 weeks into her new position, Captain Barnes arranged a demonstration for visiting officers from the Pentagon. They wanted to see Fort Carson's new environmental shooting program. Maria would lead the demonstration, showing how soldiers could adapt to challenging conditions. Morrison heard about it and doubled his efforts to undermine her. "I reviewed your lesson plans," he told Maria 2 days before the demonstration. "They're unconventional." "They're effective, sir," Maria replied. "Our recruits are scoring 15% higher than the previous training group." "Numbers can be manipulated," Morrison said dismissively. "What concerns me is that you're teaching feelings and instincts instead of hard science. The military runs on discipline and procedure, not some mystical connection to the landscape." Maria kept her voice level. "With respect, sir, marksmanship at extreme distances requires both. The science gets you close. The instinct makes the shot." "Well, let's hope your instincts don't fail you in front of the Pentagon brass. If this demonstration goes poorly, it reflects on the entire base." After he left, Private Chen approached Maria hesitantly. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I couldn't help overhearing. Is Lieutenant Morrison trying to get you fired? He's doing his job, Maria said carefully. He wants to make sure our program meets military standards. But you've made us better shooters than any of the previous instructors, Chen protested. That should be what matters. Maria smiled. You'd think so, but sometimes proving your worth isn't enough. Sometimes you have to prove it again and again until people can't look away. The night before the demonstration, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, second-guessing every decision she'd made. What if Morrison was right? What if she'd been foolish to think she could step back into this world? What if her one successful shot had been luck and tomorrow would expose her as a fraud? At 3 in the morning, her phone rang. Master Sergeant Kane. You okay, Rodriguez? He asked. How did you know I was awake? Because I've been doing this for 20 years and I know what it's like the night before you have to prove yourself. So I'm going to tell you what my first instructor told me. Tomorrow isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. Show them what you know, trust your training, and remember that you've already done the hard part. You showed up. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Sergeant. Get some sleep, and Rodriguez, you've got this. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The shooting range had been prepared for the demonstration. Targets at various distances, flags showing wind direction, a comfortable viewing area for the Pentagon officers. Maria arrived early and walked the range, checking every detail. Private Chen and 3 other recruits who'd volunteered for the demonstration were already there, looking nervous but determined. All right, Maria told them. Remember what we've practiced. Read the conditions, trust your calculations, and don't rush. These officers are here to see how we train, not to judge whether you're perfect. At 9 o'clock sharp, the Pentagon delegation arrived. 2 colonels and a 1-star general, along with Captain Barnes and several other Fort Carson officers. Lieutenant Morrison stood slightly apart, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Maria stepped forward and saluted. Good morning. I'm Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. Welcome to our environmental marksmanship demonstration. For the next hour, Maria walked the officers through her training philosophy. She explained how traditional shooting instruction often failed in real-world conditions because it didn't account for environmental variables. She demonstrated how temperature, terrain, and multiple wind currents could affect trajectory. Then she had her recruits demonstrate. One by one, they approached targets at increasing distances under challenging conditions. Private Chen made a beautiful shot at 1,200 meters, accounting for a crosswind and thermal currents. The other recruits performed well, showing the techniques Maria had taught them. The Pentagon officers nodded approvingly. The general asked intelligent questions. Captain Barnes looked pleased. Then Lieutenant Morrison spoke up. This is all very impressive, he said, but these are controlled conditions. How do we know these techniques work in actual combat situations? The general turned to Maria. That's a fair question, Staff Sergeant. What's your combat experience with these methods? Maria felt everyone's eyes on her. This was the moment Morrison had been waiting for, the chance to remind everyone that she'd been out of combat for 5 years. But before she could answer, a voice came from behind the assembled officers. I can answer that, sir. Private Henderson stepped forward. Maria hadn't known he was there. I'm Private First Class Ryan Henderson, sir. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez saved my life in Afghanistan 5 years ago. Our convoy was hit by an IED. I was wounded, bleeding badly. The enemy had us pinned down from multiple positions with clear line of sight. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pulled me behind cover, provided medical care, and then held off enemy fighters for 40 minutes until medevac arrived. Henderson's voice was steady and clear. She made shots at distance in desert conditions with multiple wind currents, with her arm injured and bleeding, while under continuous fire. She didn't have controlled conditions or flags showing wind direction. She had terrain awareness, training, and guts. That's why I'm alive today. The viewing area went silent. The general studied Maria with new interest. You were injured in that engagement, Staff Sergeant, he asked. Yes, sir. Shrapnel damage to my right arm. I've regained most functionality. The general noticed the slight tremor in her hand. And you're still shooting. Yes, sir. I've adapted my technique. Show me, the general said suddenly. Make the same shot that started all this, the one that beat the elite snipers. Maria felt her heart rate spike. The 1600-meter shot with the thermal currents. She hadn't attempted it again since that first day. Yes, sir, she said. She picked up a rifle and moved to the firing line. The old familiar doubts crowded in. What if she couldn't replicate it? What if it had been luck? What if she failed in front of everyone who'd started to believe in her? Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. Private Chen. You taught us to trust the process, Chen said quietly. Time to trust your own teaching. Maria smiled. She settled into position, her body remembering what her mind sometimes forgot. Through the scope, she studied the target. The same distance, the same thermal patterns, the same impossible shot. But this time it didn't feel impossible. It felt like coming home. She made her calculations, adjusted for windage, waited for the heartbeat pause, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the range. Hit, called the spotter, center mass. The general nodded slowly. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I think the Army has been underutilizing your talents. I'd like to discuss expanding this program to other bases. As the Pentagon officers moved away to speak with Captain Barnes, Morrison stood frozen, his face pale. Maria met his eyes. She didn't gloat or smile. She simply nodded once, soldier to soldier. The months following the demonstration transformed Maria's life in ways she'd never imagined. The Pentagon approved expansion of her environmental marksmanship program to 6 other military bases. She was promoted to Sergeant First Class and given a team of instructors to train. Articles about her methods appeared in military publications. Young soldiers, especially women, wrote to her asking for advice. But with success came new challenges. Lieutenant Morrison, humiliated by the demonstration, requested a transfer to another base. Before he left, he filed a formal complaint alleging that Maria's program relied too heavily on subjective assessment and lacked proper military rigor. The complaint triggered an official review that would take months to resolve. Don't let it get to you, Master Sergeant Kane advised. Morrison's just bitter. The review will find nothing wrong. I know, Maria said, but it's exhausting, constantly having to prove that I belong here. The truth was, Maria was tired. The past 6 months had been intense, developing curriculum, training instructors, traveling to other bases to demonstrate her methods. She pushed herself relentlessly, afraid that any sign of weakness would confirm her critics' doubts. Her right hand trembled more than usual from the stress. She developed headaches. She wasn't sleeping well. Private Chen, now promoted to specialist and serving as one of Maria's assistant instructors, noticed. Sergeant Rodriguez, when's the last time you took a day off? Chen asked one afternoon after a particularly grueling training session. I'm fine, Maria said automatically. With respect, you don't look fine. You look exhausted. Maria started to protest, then stopped. Chen was right. She was running on empty, driven by the fear that if she slowed down, everything she'd built would fall apart. That evening, Captain Barnes called her to his office. Sit down, Maria, he said, using her first name, which was unusual. I've been reviewing the expansion program metrics. The numbers are excellent, better than we'd hoped. Shooting scores are up across all bases using your methods. Soldier satisfaction is high. You've built something remarkable. Thank you, sir, Maria said, sensing a but coming. But Barnes continued, I'm concerned about sustainability. You're trying to oversee programs at 6 bases, train new instructors, develop advanced curriculum, and still teach regular classes here. That's not sustainable for one person. I can handle it, sir. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like you're one bad day away from collapse. The words stung because they were true. Barnes leaned forward. Maria, you've proved yourself 10 times over. You don't have to keep running at full speed to convince people you deserve to be here. Trust has to work both ways. You have to trust that the program you built is strong enough to stand without you holding it up every second. What are you suggesting, sir? Delegate more, train people you trust and let them carry some of the load. And for God's sake, take a vacation. That's not a suggestion, that's an order. 2 weeks starting next month. Maria wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too honest with herself to pretend she didn't need the break. Yes, sir, she said quietly. She spent the next 3 weeks training Specialist Chen and 2 other promising instructors to take over some of her responsibilities. It was harder than she'd expected, not because they weren't capable, but because letting go required a level of trust Maria wasn't sure she possessed. What if they change things? She asked Master Sergeant Kane. What if they don't maintain the standards? Kane laughed. Then you'll fix it when you get back. Maria, you taught them well. Have some faith in your own teaching. Maria took her 2 weeks of leave and drove to New Mexico to stay with her parents. The desert landscape welcomed her home like an old friend. She spent days hiking the terrain where her father had taught her to shoot, letting the silence and space clear her mind. One afternoon, sitting on a ridge watching the sunset, her father joined her. You've been carrying a heavy weight, Mija, he said. I can see it in your shoulders. I just want to make sure I don't let anyone down, Maria said. Who are you really afraid of letting down? The army, your students, or yourself? Maria was quiet for a long moment. I spent 5 years thinking I was finished, that the best parts of me died in that convoy explosion. When I got the chance to prove that wasn't true, I became terrified of losing it again. Her father nodded. After I retired from the Marines, I felt the same way. Like if I wasn't a Marine anymore, I didn't know who I was. It took me years to understand that who I was never came from the uniform. It came from here. He tapped his chest. The uniform just gave me a place to show it. So what do I do with that knowledge? Maria asked. You live like you believe it. You do your best, you trust the people around you, and you remember that your worth doesn't depend on being perfect. It depends on being true. When Maria returned to Fort Carson 2 weeks later, she felt different, lighter somehow. She'd slept well for the first time in months. The tremor in her hand had lessened. Specialist Chen greeted her with a big smile. Welcome back, Sergeant. We have so much to tell you. We developed a new exercise for teaching elevation adjustment in mountain terrain, and Sergeant Williams had this brilliant idea for. Maria held up her hand, laughing. Slow down, I want to hear everything. But first, tell me, did anything fall apart while I was gone? Chen looked offended. Of course not, you trained us well. And she had. The program ran smoothly. Her instructors had even improved some of her methods. Maria felt a swell of pride mixed with relief. She'd built something bigger than herself. The official review of Morrison's complaint concluded 2 weeks after her return. As Kane had predicted, the review found no merit to the allegations. In fact, the investigating officer's report praised Maria's program as innovative, effective, and a model for modernizing marksmanship training across the military. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. A letter arrived addressed to Maria from Afghanistan. Inside was a photograph of a young female soldier in combat gear, holding a rifle, standing in desert terrain. On the back of the photo was a handwritten note. Sergeant Rodriguez, I attended your training program at Fort Benning before my deployment. Yesterday, our patrol was pinned down in a valley with complex wind patterns. I remembered your lessons about reading terrain and thermal currents. I made a shot at 1,400 meters that neutralized the threat and saved my squad. You didn't just teach me to shoot better. You taught me to trust myself. Thank you for showing women like me what's possible. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. Maria read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why it mattered. Not the promotions or the Pentagon approval, but this. A young soldier who'd survived because of skills Maria had passed on. She added the photo to a growing collection on her office wall, pictures of soldiers she'd trained, thank you notes, achievement certificates from graduating classes, evidence that her second act was even more meaningful than her first. 6 months later, Maria received a surprise summons to the base commander's office. She arrived to find not just the commander but Captain Barnes, Master Sergeant Kane, and several other senior officers. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the commander said formally, on behalf of the United States Army, I'm pleased to inform you that you've been selected for the Instructor of the Year award. Additionally, you're being promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned as the lead developer for the Army's new Environmental Marksmanship training program at the School of Infantry. Maria stood frozen, barely processing the words. The commander smiled. In 5 years, you've gone from the mess hall to reshaping how the Army trains soldiers. That's exceptional, Rodriguez. Congratulations. After the ceremony, Specialist Chen found Maria outside, still looking dazed. You okay, Sergeant? I mean, Master Sergeant Rodriguez. Maria laughed. I'm not sure, this doesn't feel real. It's real, Chen said firmly. You earned it. And I'm glad because you showed all of us what's possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations. That evening, Maria called her parents to share the news. Her father's voice was thick with emotion. I knew you'd find your way, Mija. I never doubted it. I doubted it, Maria admitted. For a long time I thought I was finished. But you weren't, her father said. You were just waiting for the right moment to remember who you've always been. As Maria hung up, she looked around her small apartment. On the wall hung her Bronze Star citation and her new instructor certifications. On her desk sat a framed photo from the Pentagon demonstration, her recruits standing in formation, proud and confident. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the explosion that had seemed to end everything, the years in the kitchen, feeling invisible. The moment she'd stepped up to that firing line and made an impossible shot, the battle to prove herself worthy of a second chance. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and doubts and people like Morrison who'd wanted her to fail. But there had also been people like Captain Barnes and Master Sergeant Kane who'd believed in her. Students like Chen who'd trusted her teaching. And somewhere deep inside, there had been a part of Maria herself that refused to give up. The tremor in her right hand would never fully go away. Some scars didn't heal completely, but Maria had learned that scars weren't signs of weakness. They were proof of survival, evidence of battles fought and won. The next morning, Maria arrived at the shooting range before dawn. The Colorado landscape was still and silent, waiting for the sun. She picked up a rifle and settled into a firing position, not to make a shot, but simply to remember the feeling. The ground beneath her, the weight of the weapon, the possibility contained in the space between intention and action. She thought about all the soldiers she would train in her new role, young men and women who would carry her lessons into deserts and mountains and cities around the world. Some would face situations like the one that had injured Maria. Some would need to make impossible shots under terrible pressure. And because of what she taught them, some would survive who might otherwise have fallen. This was her purpose, not the medals or promotions or recognition, though those were meaningful. Her purpose was simpler and more profound, to pass on what she knew to those who would come after her, to transform pain into wisdom, failure into resilience, doubt into strength. Maria stood up, slinging the rifle over her shoulder as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the world gold and orange. She'd spent 5 years thinking her story had ended in Afghanistan, but she'd been wrong. That explosion hadn't been an ending. It had been a beginning. The mess hall cook who became an elite instructor, the injured soldier who refused to let her wounds define her, the woman who made an impossible shot and proved that second chances were real. Maria Rodriguez had found her way home, not to the soldier she'd been before, but to someone stronger, someone who knew that true courage wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up again and again until you remembered how to stand.